The Wyoming wind howled like a wounded animal across the barren expanse of Silas McCrae's ranch, carrying with it the perpetual promise of snow even in what passed for autumn in these parts. From his position on the porch, Silas watched the horizon where the mountains met the sky, their peaks already white-capped and forbidding. 4 winters had passed since Martha and little Sarah had been taken by the smallpox, and in all that time the land had grown only more desolate, as if mourning alongside him. He was 34 years old, but felt ancient, his hands rough as bark from working the unforgiving soil, his eyes dulled by too many dawns faced alone. The ranch house, once filled with Martha's singing and Sarah's laughter, now stood as silent as a tomb. Even the walls seemed to have absorbed his grief, the logs darkening with each passing season until they matched the color of his mood. The cattle had dwindled to barely 24 head, and the horses, well, there were only 3 left now, including his old mare, Duchess. The barn still bore the scorch marks from last year's lightning strike, and he hadn't had the heart or help to properly repair it. Everything on the McCrae ranch spoke of slow decline, of a man going through the motions of living without truly being alive. It was Reverend Campbell from town who had first mentioned the mail-order bride advertisements. Silas had been picking up supplies at Henderson's general store when the preacher cornered him. "You can't go on like this, Silas," the Reverend had said, his voice gentle but insistent. "The Lord didn't mean for man to be alone." "The Lord took my family," Silas had replied, his voice flat. Reckon he made his opinion on the matter clear enough? But the seed had been planted. Not out of hope for love. That part of him had been buried with Martha and Sarah in the small cemetery plot on the hill behind the house. No, it was pure practicality that finally drove him to pick up the pen. The ranch needed tending, the house needed keeping, and come winter, a man alone could freeze to death if he took ill with no one to tend the fire. The letter he finally sent was brutally honest. "To whom it may concern, I'm a rancher in Wyoming Territory, age 34, seeking a wife. I offer no pretty words or false promises. The life here is hard. Winters are long and bitter. The nearest neighbor is 8 miles distant. I have a sound house and productive land. Though both have seen better days, I am not looking for love. As my heart was buried 4 years past, I seek a helpmate, someone strong enough to share the burden of this life. In return, I offer protection, provision, and respect. I am told I am not unkind, though I am given to long silences. If you seek adventure or romance, look elsewhere. If you seek an honest life with an honest man, I await your response. Silas McCrae." Meanwhile, in a Boston boarding house that smelled of cabbage and despair, Clara Everly read the letter for the 10th time. At 26, she was already considered past her prime by society's standards. But that was the least of her concerns. The bruises on her arms had finally faded from purple to yellow, but she could still feel Charles Worthington's fingers there, could still hear his cultured voice promising that next time, he wouldn't be so gentle. Charles was everything Boston society adored. Wealthy, charming, from an old family. He was also a monster who had shown his true face only after their engagement was announced. When Clara had tried to break it off, he'd made it clear that no one would believe her over him. And he'd been right. Even her own mother had accused her of hysteria, of throwing away her one chance at respectability. The other letters she'd received through the matrimonial agency had been full of flowery promises and exaggerated claims. Men looking for pretty wives to show off, or naive girls to warm their beds. But this Silas McCrae, his honesty was harsh as a slap. And somehow that made it the most trustworthy thing she'd read in months. She wrote back, "Mr. McCrae, your honesty is appreciated and returned in kind. I am 26, neither beautiful nor delicate. I can work hard, cook plain food well, and have nursed through sickness. I seek not romance, but refuge, not adventure, but a place to build a life free from the past. I have known cold winters of a different kind, and do not fear yours. If you will have me, I will come. Clara Everly." They exchanged only 2 more letters, each as brief and practical as the first. He sent train fare and instructions. She packed her few belongings, left a note for her mother that explained nothing, and boarded the train west with her heart hammering but her jaw set firm. The journey was supposed to take 8 days. It took 9. The snowstorm hit just as the stagecoach was crossing Devil's Pass, 40 miles from Willow Creek. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete, had pushed on despite the darkening sky, muttering about schedules and mail contracts. Clara was the only passenger, clutching her carpetbag and trying not to think about how the wind sounded like Charles when he'd been drinking. When the coach went over, it happened fast. One moment they were crawling along the narrow track. The next the world was spinning, wood splintering. Clara's scream lost in the roar of the wind. She came to consciousness in a snowbank, blood freezing on her forehead. Pete's motionless form half buried nearby. The horses were gone, either dead or run off. Clara dragged herself to Pete, but his neck was bent at an angle that made checking for breath pointless. She was alone, in a blizzard, with the night falling. Back in Willow Creek, Silas stood at the stage depot, hat in hand, watching the empty road. The storm had rolled in fast, turning the sky the color of old pewter. Bob Turner, the depot agent, shook his head. "Ain't coming tonight." "Silas, not in this weather. If Pete had any sense, he'd have held up in Bridger." But Silas knew, with a certainty that sat like lead in his stomach, that Pete had pushed on. The man was too stubborn to let weather stop him, which meant somewhere out there, in that white hell, was the woman who was supposed to be his wife. "She's not coming," he said, the words tasting like ash. Bob misunderstood. "Now, don't go thinking like that. Lots of them mail-order brides get cold feet. Sure, but she'll be on tomorrow's stage. You'll see." But Silas wasn't thinking about cold feet. He was thinking about Martha, about how death came sudden and unfair in this country. He was thinking about how he'd been a fool to hope for even this pale shadow of companionship. He rode back to the ranch through the screaming wind, Duchess fighting him every step. By the time he reached home, he could barely see through the snow. That's why he didn't notice the tracks at first, the signs of disturbance around the barn. It was the smell that alerted him, smoke and kerosene, acrid in the cold air. The barn's far wall was charred black. Though the snow had doused the flames before they could spread, inside, 3 of his cattle lay with their throats cut, and his best-laying hens were gone. The house had been ransacked, flour spilled across the kitchen floor, his few precious glass windows shattered. Martha's china, the only things of hers he'd kept, smashed to glittering fragments. Silas didn't need to search for clues. He knew who'd done this. Jake Morrison and his boys had been pressing him to sell for 2 years now, wanting to expand their own spread. He'd refused every offer, and now they'd decided to force the issue. He found where they'd been waiting for him, cigarette butts behind the woodshed, boot prints leading to where horses had been tethered. They'd expected him to come back with his bride, distracted and vulnerable. Instead, the storm had kept him in town longer than expected. A board studded with nails caught him across the shoulders as he rounded the corner of the house, sending him sprawling. 3 shapes materialized from the snow, Morrison's younger boys, hired for their meanness more than their cattle sense. Silas fought, but it was 3 against 1, and the ambush had left him stunned. By the time they finished, he was bloody and broken, ribs cracked, left eye swollen shut. They left him in the snow, probably thinking the cold would finish what they'd started. He dragged himself inside through pure stubbornness, leaving a trail of blood on Martha's clean floors. The fire had died in the stove. His hands shook too badly to light it again. He made it to the bedroom, to the bed he'd shared with Martha, and collapsed. So this is how it ends, he thought. Alone, as he'd always known he would be since the day he'd buried his girls. The woman, Clara, she'd been smart not to come. This was no place for anyone, least of all someone seeking refuge. The house grew colder. Ice formed on the insides of the broken windows. Silas pulled Martha's quilt over himself and closed his eyes, ready to join his family at last. He didn't hear the barn door slam, didn't hear the hoofbeats approaching through the storm. And he certainly didn't hear the knock at the door that would change everything, arriving just in time. A day late, but not too late after all. Clara stumbled into Willow Creek just as the church bells were tolling noon, though the storm made it dark as twilight. She'd walked through the night after the coach accident, following what she hoped was the road, her dress frozen stiff as armor, her fingers numb inside her gloves. The first person she encountered was old Samuel Finch, who was struggling to secure a shutter on his shop. "Lord have mercy!" he exclaimed, catching her as she swayed. "Miss, you look half dead." "The stage," she managed through chattering teeth. "Overturned. Driver's dead. I'm supposed to meet Silas McCrae." Samuel's weathered face went grim. "You're the mail-order bride? Oh, child, you haven't heard—" "Heard what?" "McCrae's place was hit last night. Morrison's boys. Most likely. Doc Hartman's up there now, but—" He shook his head. "They say McCrae might not make it. Beat him something terrible. Burned his barn. In this cold. Alone up there." Clara felt something fierce rise in her chest. She'd come too far, survived too much, to let it end like this. "I need to get to him. In this storm, it's 8 miles of hard riding, and that's if you know the way. Then I need someone who knows the way." Samuel studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, the dried blood on her forehead, the determination burning in her eyes despite her body's exhaustion. "Elijah!" he called to a figure hunched near the livery stable. "Get over here!" Elijah Moss was 70 if he was a day, a freed slave who'd come west after the war and knew every trail in the territory. He listened to Samuel's explanation, then fixed Clara with a penetrating stare. "You sure about this, miss? McCrae's a good man, but he's been half ghost since his family died. And if Morrison's boys done what Samuel says, I'm sure." Clara said firmly, "I came here to be his wife. That doesn't change because of some outlaws." Elijah nodded slowly. "All right then, but we go on my terms. You do exactly as I say, when I say it." They set out on Elijah's mare and a borrowed mount, Clara clinging to the saddle horn with fingers that could barely feel the leather. The storm had lessened, but still threw ice crystals sharp as glass. Elijah led them up trails Clara could barely see, through stands of pine that provided momentary shelter, across ridges where the wind tried to tear them from their horses. "Why are you helping me?" Clara asked during one brief rest, shouting over the wind. "Told you, McCrae's a good man," Elijah replied. "After the war, when I first came here, most folks wouldn't give a colored man the time of day. McCrae gave me work, paid fair wages. When some boys tried to run me off, he stood with a rifle on his porch and told them they'd have to go through him first." He pulled his scarf tighter. "Man like that deserves better than dying alone." They reached the ranch as the last gray light was fading. Clara's heart sank at the sight. The charred barn, the dead cattle covered in snow, the house dark and silent with its broken windows gaping like dead eyes. "Wait here," Elijah said, drawing an old army revolver. "Let me check it's clear." But Clara was already sliding from her horse, legs nearly buckling as they hit the ground. She pushed through the door, which hung askew on its hinges, and called out, "Mr. McCrae? Silas McCrae?" No answer. The house was cold as a tomb, darker than the storm outside. Clara fumbled for matches on what she assumed was a kitchen shelf, knocking over something that shattered on the floor. Finally, her numb fingers found a lamp and managed to light it. The destruction inside was worse than she'd imagined. Furniture overturned, belongings scattered and smashed, a violence to it that spoke of pure meanness. But worse was the trail of blood leading toward the back of the house. She followed it, lamp held high, heart hammering. The bedroom door was ajar. She pushed it open and found him. Silas McCrae lay still as death on a bed covered in a beautiful quilt, its pattern barely visible beneath the blood. His face was so swollen and bruised she wouldn't have known him for human if not for the slight rise and fall of his chest. One eye was completely shut, his lips split, dark bruises visible on what skin she could see. "Oh," she breathed, setting the lamp on the dresser with shaking hands. "Oh, no." Elijah appeared in the doorway. "He alive?" "Barely. Help me get the stove going. We need heat and water." They worked with desperate efficiency, while Elijah coaxed life back into the kitchen stove and nailed blankets over the broken windows. Clara began the delicate process of assessing Silas's injuries. She'd nursed her father through his final illness, had tended enough of Charles's victims among the servant girls to know something about healing. She had to cut away his shirt. The blood had dried it to his skin. What she found underneath made her bite back a cry. Boot prints marked his ribs in purple-black bruises, cuts that looked deliberate, meant to hurt rather than kill. They'd taken their time with him. "Animals," she whispered, with infinite care. She began cleaning the wounds. The water in the basin turned red, then black. She had Elijah heat more while she searched for anything resembling medical supplies. She found whiskey. That would do for cleaning. Some relatively clean cloth that could serve as bandages. A needle and thread for the worst of the cuts. Through it all, Silas remained unconscious, though he moaned when she had to manipulate his ribs to wrap them. She thought 2, maybe 3 were cracked. His breathing was labored but steady. The most intimate moment came when she needed to check for further injuries. His body, beneath the damage, spoke of hard work, muscle earned through labor, scars that told stories of a difficult life. She tried to maintain clinical detachment, but this was her first real sight of the man she'd agreed to marry, and the vulnerability of him, broken and trusting her hands even in unconsciousness, stirred something protective in her. "You're going to live," she told him firmly, as if her will could make it so. "You hear me, Silas McCrae? You're going to live because I didn't walk through a blizzard and nearly die myself just to watch you give up now." Night deepened. Elijah had to leave. His own family would worry, but he promised to return come morning with Doc Hartman and supplies. Clara was left alone with her patient in the lamplit room that smelled of blood and whiskey and the faint scent of lavender from the quilt. She pulled a chair next to the bed and kept watch. Every so often, she'd change the cloth on his forehead or drip water between his split lips. She found herself talking to fill the silence, telling him about the journey, about the coach accident, about walking through the night following stars she hoped were leading her in the right direction. "I must have looked a fright when I got to town," she said, wringing out another cloth. "Frozen near solid, covered in blood. Your friend Samuel probably thought I was a ghost." Around midnight, Silas's fever spiked. He tossed restlessly, mumbling words she couldn't make out. Then, clear as day, "Martha, Martha, don't go. Please don't leave me." Clara's heart clenched. She caught his failing hand, held it firm. "Shh," she soothed. "Rest now. Just rest. Sarah?" His good eye cracked open, unfocused. "Baby girl, Papa's here. Papa's got you." Tears she hadn't known were coming spilled down Clara's cheeks. This man, this broken, grieving man, was still trying to save his family in his delirium. She squeezed his hand tighter. "They're safe," she whispered, not knowing if it was cruel or kind. "They're safe and waiting for you, but not yet. You have to stay here a little longer." He seemed to calm at that, his breathing evening out. But his hand clutched hers like a lifeline, and she couldn't bring herself to pull away. So she sat there, this stranger who was supposed to be her husband, holding his hand while the storm raged outside and the lamp burned low. Near dawn, he woke properly for the first time. His good eye focused on her with difficulty, taking in her bedraggled appearance, her presence in his room, the fact that she was holding his hand. "Who?" he managed through swollen lips. "Clara," she said simply. "Clara Everly. I'm sorry I'm late." He stared at her for a long moment, processing this. "The bride? The bride. You came. I came." He tried to sit up, gasped at the pain in his ribs, and fell back. "You shouldn't. Not safe." "Hush," Clara said, pressing him back onto the pillows. "The only thing you need to worry about is healing. I'll handle the rest. But Morrison will be dealt with when you're stronger. For now, you need to rest." He studied her with that one good eye, seeming to really see her for the first time. "You walked through the storm. The coach overturned. I didn't have much choice. You could have stayed in town. When you heard—" Clara met his gaze steadily. "I could have, but I said I'd come, and I keep my word. Besides," she added with a wry smile, "after walking all night through a blizzard, I wasn't about to let some cowardly outlaws scare me off." Something that might have been a smile tugged at his split lip. "Practical," he murmured. "That's what you advertised for, wasn't it?" He squeezed her hand. She hadn't realized he was still holding it. "Stay?" he asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice. "As long as you need me," Clara promised. He drifted back to sleep, but his hand remained clasped around hers. Clara sat in the chair, watching the sunrise paint the mountains beyond the window, and felt, for the first time in months, like she might have found a place where she could stop running. Not the home she'd dreamed of as a girl. That dream had died with Charles's first blow. But perhaps something better. Something real. A home built not on pretty lies, but on truth. On two damaged people choosing to face the harsh world together rather than alone. She looked down at their joined hands, his scarred and swollen, hers chapped and bloodied from the journey, and thought they matched rather well. "We're quite a pair, aren't we, Mr. McCrae?" she whispered to the sleeping man. "The rancher who lost everything, and the bride who arrived a day late, but maybe that's exactly when I was supposed to come, just in time to save each other." The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of careful tending and quiet healing. Doc Hartman had come and gone, confirming Clara's assessment. Cracked ribs, severe bruising, possible concussion, but nothing that wouldn't mend with time and care. He'd looked at Clara with something like approval when he saw how she'd cleaned and wrapped the wounds. "You've done well, Mrs. McCrae," he'd said, and neither she nor Silas had corrected the assumption of their marriage. It seemed a small lie in the face of larger truths. Clara threw herself into the work of resurrection. The house, despite the violence done to it, had good bones. She swept up the broken glass, scrubbed blood from the floors, and salvaged what she could from the wreckage. The destroyed china, Martha's china. She understood now. She gathered piece by piece into a box, thinking perhaps something might be mended. Silas watched her from the bed those first days, his one good eye tracking her movements as she went about setting his world to rights. He spoke little. Whether from pain or natural reticence, she couldn't tell, but his gaze held a quality of wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. The chickens had scattered during the attack but hadn't gone far. Clara coaxed them back with feed she found in the barn, clucking and calling until they came pecking around her skirts. Only 3 of the original dozen remained, but it was a start. She repaired their coop with boards pulled from the damaged barn wall, hammering with more determination than skill. "You don't have to," Silas said on the 3rd day, when he caught her dragging water from the well for the 10th time. "Have to what?" Clara paused, pushing a strand of hair from her face. "Any of this? This isn't what you agreed to." She set down the bucket and fixed him with a look that brooked no argument. "I agreed to be a helpmate. That's what I'm doing. Now, do you want your broth hot or cold?" By the end of the first week, Silas could sit up without gasping. Clara had established a routine: morning chores, breakfast, tending his wounds, midday meal, afternoon work on the house and barn, supper, then the quiet evening hours when they sat together in the kitchen, him in Martha's old rocker that had survived the ransacking, her mending by lamplight. They slept in separate rooms, him in the bedroom, her on a makeshift bed in what had been Sarah's room. The child's things had been packed away long ago, leaving only empty spaces that spoke of loss. But sometimes, in the deep of night, Clara would hear him call out in his sleep, and she would slip into his room to sit beside him until the nightmares passed. It was during one such night, 2 weeks after her arrival, that the dynamics between them shifted. She'd been awakened not by his voice, but by a crash from his room. She found him on the floor beside the bed, shaking violently, eyes wide but unseeing. "Silas," she said gently, kneeling beside him. "Silas, you're safe. You're in your home. You're safe." He focused on her slowly, his breathing ragged. Clara. Yes, you fell. Can you stand? He nodded, but when he tried, his legs wouldn't hold him. Without thinking, Clara slipped under his arm, taking his weight against her side. He was solid and warm, smelling of the liniment she'd been using on his bruises and something indefinably male that made her suddenly aware of her thin nightgown. Together they managed to get him back on the bed. She meant to pull away then, but his arm tightened around her shoulders. Please, he said, so quietly she almost missed it. Could you stay, just for a moment? Clara hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety. But then she thought of all the proprieties that had caged her back in Boston, of how following society's rules had nearly destroyed her, and she nodded. She sat on the edge of the bed, meaning to maintain some distance, but Silas's hand found hers in the darkness. I dream about them, he said after a long silence. Martha and Sarah. But it's worse now. I dream you're there too, and I can't save any of you. Clara's throat tightened. We're fine, she said. We're all fine. You don't understand. His voice was rough with more than pain. Everyone close to me dies. My parents, my brother, my wife, my child. I'm poison. Clara, you should have stayed in town. You should run now while you can. Is that what you want? For me to leave? His hand tightened on hers almost convulsively. No, he admitted. God help me. No, that's what makes me selfish. Clara shifted to face him more fully. In the moonlight, through the window, she could see his face, still swollen but healing, marked by grief as much as fists. Then I'll tell you a secret, she said. Everyone I've trusted has hurt me. My father drank himself to death and left us penniless. My mother sold me to the highest bidder. Oh, she called it marriage, but that's what it was. And Charles, she swallowed hard. Charles showed me that monsters can wear fine suits and speak pretty words. So by your logic, I'm poison too. Clara, no, listen. She squeezed his hand back. Maybe we're both poison. Or maybe we're both just people who've been hurt and are trying to find a way to keep living. Either way, I'm not running. I've done enough running. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Silas shifted, wincing. This bed is big enough, he said carefully. You could, that is, if you wanted to rest properly instead of that chair. Clara knew she should refuse, knew that sharing a bed, even innocently, changed things. But she was tired of being cold, tired of being alone, and the careful way he'd asked, giving her all the power to refuse, made her feel safer than all of Charles's passionate declarations ever had. She slipped under the covers on the far side of the bed, careful not to jostle his ribs. They lay there, not touching except for their still-joined hands, listening to each other breathe. Clara? Silas said into the darkness. Yes, thank you. She knew he wasn't just thanking her for staying tonight. You're welcome. After that night, the careful distances they'd maintained began to erode. Clara still kept to her own room, but sometimes she'd find reasons to linger in the kitchen after supper, and sometimes he'd find reasons to need help with tasks that brought them close together. The first time they went to town together was 3 weeks after her arrival. Silas was well enough to ride, though still moving carefully. Clara wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much after her journey, and tried not to notice the stares and whispers as they made their way down Main Street. At Henderson's general store, Mrs. Henderson looked Clara up and down with sharp eyes. So, you're the mail-order bride. Heard you arrived in quite a state. The journey was eventful. Clara replied evenly, selecting flour and coffee from the shelves. And how are you finding married life? Must be quite an adjustment, coming from back east to Silas's situation. Clara felt Silas tense beside her. She set down her basket and met Mrs. Henderson's gaze squarely. I find Mr. McCrae to be exactly as advertised, an honest man dealing honestly with life's challenges. I couldn't ask for more. Mrs. Henderson's mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. But old Mrs. Adler, examining ribbons nearby, cackled. Well said, girl. About time someone put Constance in her place. They were loading their purchases when a group of men approached. Clara recognized the type immediately. The same swaggering confidence Charles's friends had worn like cologne. The leader, a handsome man with cold eyes, tipped his hat mockingly. "McCrae, heard you had some trouble at your place. Shame about that." Silas's jaw tightened. Morrison. So this was the man behind the attack. Clara studied him, noting the way his companions spread out slightly, the barely concealed threat in their positioning. "Ma'am," Morrison said, turning to Clara with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jake Morrison. I own the double bar spread next to your husband's little patch. You ever get tired of playing house in that rundown shack? You come see me. I could show you what real prosperity looks like." Clara felt Silas start forward and placed a warning hand on his arm. He was still healing, in no condition to fight. She smiled sweetly at Morrison. "How kind of you, Mr. Morrison." "But I've already seen what your version of prosperity looks like. Sneaking around in the dark, attacking injured men, destroying what others have built. I prefer my husband's honest poverty to your coward's wealth." Morrison's face darkened. "You should teach your woman to watch her tongue. McCrae." "My wife speaks her own mind," Silas said quietly, something a real man would appreciate. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Marshal Dixon appeared, badge glinting in the sun. "Problem here, gentlemen?" "No problem, Marshal," Morrison said, but his eyes promised this wasn't over. "Just welcoming Mrs. McCrae to town." After they left, Clara realized she was trembling. Silas's hand covered hers on his arm. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did." She looked up at him. "They need to know I'm not some fragile Eastern flower they can scare off. I'm here to stay." Something shifted in his expression then, a warmth that transformed his weather-beaten features. "Clara Everly," he said softly, "you are indeed full of surprises." That night, as she served the special supper she'd made with their town purchases, including real sugar for the cornbread, she found him watching her with that same warm look. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing, just this almost feels like a home again." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Well, don't get used to it. Tomorrow it's back to beans and biscuits." But when she passed his chair to clear the plates, he caught her hand. "I mean it, Clara. You've brought something back to life here, something I thought was dead forever." She looked down at their joined hands, becoming a habit, these small touches, and squeezed gently. Maybe we're both doing that for each other. Later, as she prepared for bed in her small room, she heard his voice through the wall. "Good night, Clara." She smiled in the darkness. "Good night, Silas." It wasn't love, not yet, but it was trust and comfort and the promise of something that might grow in time. For two people who'd thought themselves beyond such possibilities, it was more than enough. It was a beginning. Spring came slowly to the mountains, creeping up the valleys in shades of green and gold. By April, Silas was fully healed. The only reminders of his ordeal, the slight stiffness in his ribs on cold mornings, and a thin scar through his left eyebrow. He and Clara had fallen into a rhythm of shared work and comfortable silences. Two people learning to exist in the same space without demanding more than the other could give. It was on a particularly fine morning that Silas suggested they ride out to survey the property boundaries. "There's things you should know," he said over breakfast, "if you're to be a true partner in this place." Clara agreed readily. She'd learned to ride on Duchess, the gentle mare accepting her with the patient resignation of a horse who'd seen too much to be surprised by anything. They packed simple provisions, biscuits, dried beef, early berries Clara had found growing wild near the stream. The land revealed itself to her in stages as they rode. First the lower pastures where the surviving cattle grazed, then up through stands of aspen and pine, following trails only Silas could see. He spoke more than usual as they went, pointing out landmarks, explaining water rights, showing her which plants the Shoshone had taught him were good for healing. "This is the north boundary," he said as they crested a ridge. The view stretched for miles, snow-capped peaks, valleys still misted with morning, the silver thread of a river far below. Everything from here to Singer's Creek belongs to the ranch. It's beautiful. Clara breathed, and meant it. After Boston's crowded streets and society's suffocating rooms, this vastness felt like freedom itself. Martha used to say it was too big, Silas said quietly. Too empty. She was a town girl, missed having neighbors close by. I always promised her that someday, when the ranch was prosperous, we'd build a house closer to town. He gazed out at the horizon. Never got the chance. Clara studied his profile, seeing the grief that still lived in the lines around his eyes. Tell me about her, she said gently. If you want to. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she laughed all the time. At everything, my poor jokes, the rooster strutting, Sarah's baby babble. The house was full of that laughter. When the sickness took them, the silence after was, he swallowed hard. It was like the mountains themselves had gone quiet. Clara reached over and touched his hand where it rested on his saddle horn. He turned his palm up, lacing their fingers together. And Sarah? She prompted softly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. 3 years old and already trying to ride Duchess by herself. Stubborn as a mule, that one. Got that from me. Martha always said she had these bright blue eyes that saw everything, questioned everything. Why, Papa? Every other word. His voice roughened. The fever took her first. Martha held on 2 more days, but I think she'd already decided to follow. Couldn't imagine a world without her baby girl. They sat in silence on their horses, hands still linked, the vast wilderness holding their small grief. Finally, Silas squeezed her fingers and released them. Come, he said. There's something else I want to show you. He led her down a winding path to a meadow bisected by a clear mountain stream. Wildflowers were just beginning to bloom. Indian paintbrush, columbine. Flowers Clara couldn't name, but it wasn't the flowers that made her gasp. There, beside the stream, stood a small fenced plot with 2 wooden crosses. The grass was neat, recently tended, and someone, Silas, she realized, had planted what looked like rose bushes, though they weren't yet blooming. I bring them flowers when I can, he said, dismounting. Talk to them sometimes. Probably foolish. Not foolish at all, Clara said, sliding down from Duchess. She stood back while he went to the graves, watched as he knelt and pulled a few weeds, straightened Sarah's cross, which had tilted slightly. His lips moved in quiet conversation she didn't try to hear. When he finally stood and returned to her, his eyes were wet. Without thinking, she reached up and brushed a tear from his cheek. He caught her hand, held it there against his face. I'm glad you know, he said roughly. Glad you've seen them. Makes it feel less like I dreamed it all. They spread their noon meal on a flat rock overlooking the stream. The sun was warm, the air filled with the sound of water and bird song. Clara found herself telling him about her own losses, her father's slow destruction, the baby she'd never held. I was 16, she said, looking at the water rather than at him. The father was my mother's employer's son. When I told my mother, she said I'd ruined everything, that no decent man would have me now. She arranged for me to go to a home for wayward girls, have the baby in secret. But something went wrong during the birth. The baby, a boy, he never drew breath. Silas's hand found hers. Clara, they wouldn't let me hold him. Said it was better that way. But I heard him. Silas heard that silence where his cries should have been. I think I've been hearing it ever since. He pulled her against his side, and she let herself lean into his strength. They sat that way for a long time. 2 people who understood that sometimes love meant loss, that grief was just the other side of having had something precious. As the afternoon wore on, they explored more of the property. Silas showed her the best fishing spots, the cave where a bear sometimes hibernated, the hot spring hidden in a grove of pines. At each place, he had a story, how he'd discovered it, what had happened there, why it mattered. It was at the spring, steam rising mystically in the cooling air, that the atmosphere between them shifted. Clara had dipped her fingers in to test the temperature and exclaimed at the heat. Silas knelt beside her, and suddenly they were very close. Close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his brown eyes, could feel his breath on her cheek. "Clara," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like a question. She turned toward him, their faces inches apart. For a long moment, they hovered there, balanced on the edge of something irreversible. Then a branch cracked in the woods nearby, probably just a deer, but the spell broke. They pulled apart, both breathing a little too fast. The ride home was quiet but not uncomfortable. As they worked together to unsaddle the horses and brush them down, their hands would brush, their bodies would come close in the familiar dance of shared labor. And each time Clara felt that same electric awareness. That evening, as she served supper, Silas cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what Morrison said in town, about this being a shack not fit for a woman." Clara's hands stilled on the coffee pot. "Silas McCrae, if you're about to suggest I'd be better off elsewhere—" "No." He looked genuinely alarmed. "No, that's not— I mean, he's wrong. But he's also not entirely wrong. This place needs work. Improvements. Things I let go after." He gestured vaguely. "I thought maybe we could work on it together. Make it a proper home again." Clara set down the pot and sat across from him. "What did you have in mind?" His eyes lit up in a way she hadn't seen before. "Well, the kitchen could use new shelves, and the pump inside would save you hauling water. I've been thinking about adding a room on the east side, a proper parlor maybe, with real glass windows. And—" he paused, suddenly shy. "I thought maybe you'd like to choose some laying hens in town, start building up the flock again." "I'd like that," Clara said softly. "I'd like that very much." After supper, instead of retreating to their separate occupations, they sat together at the table with paper and pencil, sketching rough plans, their heads bent close over the drawings. And when Clara suggested moving the stove to create more working space, Silas's smile was bright as a boy's. "That's clever," he said. "You've got a good eye for this." Their hands were resting on the table, inches apart, slowly, as if magnetized. They drifted together until their fingers intertwined. Clara looked up to find Silas watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Clara," he said roughly, "I need you to know. I'm not good at this, at feeling again. After Martha, I thought that part of me was dead, but you—" He struggled for words. "You make me want to try." Clara turned her hand in his, gripping tightly. "We can try together," she whispered. "As slow as you need, as careful as we both need, but together." He lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles, the gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. When he looked at her again, years seemed to have lifted from his face. "Together," he agreed. That night, for the first time since that night of nightmares weeks ago, Clara heard his voice through the wall. "Clara, are you awake?" "Yes," she called back softly. "I just wanted to say, today was good. The best day I've had in a long time." Clara smiled in the darkness, hugging her pillow. "For me too, Silas, for me too." She heard his bed creak as he shifted. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Sweet dreams, Clara, sweet dreams." And for the first time in longer than either could remember, they were. The change in Clara's approach was deliberate but not calculated. She knew that healing happened not in isolation but in community, and if she was to make a true life here, she needed to weave herself into the fabric of Willow Creek. So she began small, helping Mrs. Finch organize the church bazaar, bringing fresh eggs to the widow Patterson, who lived alone at the edge of town, offering her neat handwriting to help the schoolteacher Miss Garrett with record-keeping. "You don't have to do this," Silas said one morning as she prepared a basket of preserves for the minister's ailing wife. "These people, they've been cold to us both." "Some have," Clara agreed, tying a checkered cloth over the basket. "But not all. And even those who whisper, they're just people. Silas, frightened of change, protective of what they know. I was a stranger arriving under strange circumstances. Of course they're wary. She found her first real ally in Dr. Hartman, the physician. Impressed by her competent nursing during Silas's recovery, asked if she might assist him occasionally when his regular nurse was overwhelmed. "I can't pay much," he admitted, "but I could teach you proper techniques, and heaven knows this town could use another pair of healing hands." Clara accepted eagerly. The work gave her purpose beyond the ranch, and gradually, as people saw her gentle efficiency with the sick and injured, the whispers began to change tone. She was no longer just that mail-order bride, but Mrs. McCrae, who helped set little Tommy's broken arm, or the woman who sat all night with Mrs. Chen during her difficult labor. It was after one such long night, helping deliver the Chen's healthy baby girl, that Clara encountered real trouble. Dawn was just breaking as she walked toward where she'd left Duchess tied outside the doctor's office. Her dress was rumpled, her hair escaping its pins, exhaustion making her less aware of her surroundings than usual. Well, the dedicated nurse, all alone. Clara's blood chilled. Tom Morrison, Jake's younger brother, stepped out from the alley between buildings. She'd seen him in town before, handsome in a sharp-edged way, with his brother's cold eyes but a meaner cast to his mouth. "Mr. Morrison," she said evenly, continuing toward Duchess. "Good morning." He moved to block her path. "Now, that ain't friendly. Here I am, trying to make conversation with a pretty lady. And you want to run off? I'm expected home. My husband will worry." Tom laughed. An ugly sound. "Your husband? That broken-down rancher who can barely keep a roof over your head? You deserve better than that. Mrs. McCrae? A woman like you, all that fire and spirit. You need a real man." Clara's hand moved to the small knife she'd taken to carrying in her pocket. Silas had insisted after the incident in town. "Step aside, Mr. Morrison." Or what? He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath despite the early hour. "You'll stick me with that little blade? Come now, we both know you're too much of a lady for that." That was his mistake, assuming she was still the lady she'd been raised to be. Clara had left that woman frozen in a snowbank the night the stagecoach overturned. Her hand was steady as she drew the knife. "I've butchered hogs bigger than you, Mr. Morrison. Don't test me." His face darkened. "You little—" He grabbed for her arm. Clara moved as Silas had taught her, pivoting away while bringing the knife up. The blade caught his sleeve, slicing through fabric and drawing a line of blood along his forearm. Tom cursed and jerked back, then advanced again with real fury in his eyes. But before he could reach her, a rifle shot split the morning air. Tom froze as the bullet kicked up dust inches from his boots. "Next one goes in your knee." Silas's voice rang out, deadly calm. "Then I work my way up." Clara turned to see her husband standing in the street, rifle steady despite the fact he must have ridden hard to get here. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with a fury she'd never seen before. "This ain't your business. McCrae!" Tom snarled, but he was already backing away. "My wife is always my business. You touch her again, you even look at her wrong, and they'll find pieces of you scattered from here to the divide. That's not a threat. Morrison, that's a promise." Tom's hand went to his bleeding arm. "She cut me. There are laws, and there are witnesses." "Dr. Hartman said, emerging from his office with Marshal Dixon beside him. "I saw everything from my window. Self-defense. Clear as day. Though I'd be happy to testify about the kind of man who threatens a woman who just spent all night helping bring life into this world." Marshal Dixon stepped forward, hand on his pistol. "Tom Morrison, I warned you about causing trouble in my town. You can leave now, under your own power, or I can drag you to jail. Your choice." Tom looked between them all, his face ugly with rage. "This ain't over," he spat, then turned and strode away. The moment he was gone, Clara's knees went weak. Silas was there in an instant, catching her against him, his hands running over her as if checking for injury. Did he hurt you? Clara, did he? I'm fine, she managed, though she was shaking now. I'm fine. I cut him. Shh. He pulled her tight against his chest. You did good. You did exactly right. It was only then that Clara realized they had an audience. Half the town seemed to have emerged to witness the confrontation. She waited for the whispers, the judgment, but instead she saw something else in their faces. Respect, and perhaps a touch of shame. Mrs. Henderson herself stepped forward. Clara, Mrs. McCrae, I owe you an apology. I've been unkind. You helped my sister last month when her boy was sick, asked for nothing in return. And now this. She gestured helplessly. You're a good woman. I'm sorry it took something like this for me to see it. Others murmured agreement. And suddenly Clara found herself surrounded by people offering support, expressing outrage at Tom Morrison's behavior, praising her courage. It was overwhelming after months of cold shoulders and whispered speculation. But through it all, Silas kept his arm around her, anchoring her, when they finally made their escape. Riding home together on Duchess with Silas's horse trailing behind, Clara found herself laughing shakily. What? Silas asked, his breath warm against her ear. I was trying so hard to win them over with good works and kind words. Turns out all I needed to do was pull a knife on a Morrison. His arms tightened around her. Don't joke. When I came to town to find you and saw him cornering you. His voice roughened. I've never been so scared in my life. Clara twisted in the saddle to look at him. How did you know to come? Woke up and you weren't there. Note said you were helping with the Chen baby. But something felt wrong. Call it intuition. He cupped her face with one hand. Clara, if anything had happened to you. But it didn't, she said softly. You came. You always come when I need you. Something shifted in his expression. A wall's coming down that had been there since the day she arrived. Always, he said, and it sounded like a vow. I'll always come for you. They were near the ranch now, the morning sun painting the mountains gold. Clara should have been exhausted from her sleepless night, but instead, she felt electric, alive with the knowledge that had been growing for weeks now. Silas, she said as he helped her down from Duchess. I need to tell you something. He stilled, wariness creeping into his features. What is it? She took his hands, feeling them tremble slightly in hers. I didn't come here looking for love. Neither of us did. We were clear about that from the start. Clara, let me finish. She squeezed his hands. I didn't come looking for love, but I found it anyway. I found it in the way you trusted me to tend your wounds, in the way you showed me your daughters' graves, in the way you teach me things without making me feel foolish, in the way you came charging into town because something felt wrong. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I love you, Silas McCrae. I don't expect you to say it back. I know your heart is still healing, but I needed you to know. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his face unreadable. Then he pulled her against him so suddenly she gasped, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that was desperate and tender and full of unspoken words. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, there were tears on his cheeks. You brave, wonderful woman, he said roughly. How do you not know? How can you not see that I've been falling in love with you since the night you walked through a blizzard to save a stranger? I'm not good with words like you are. But Clara, he framed her face with his hands. You brought me back to life. You made me want to live again instead of just survive. I love you. God help me. I tried not to, but I love you so much it terrifies me. Clara was crying now too, months of careful distance and tentative hope dissolving in the morning light. We're quite a pair, she managed, both too scared to say at first. Not anymore, Silas said firmly. No more being scared. No more holding back. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. Come inside. You need rest, and I need to hold you and know you're safe. As they walked hand in hand toward the house, Clara felt something settle in her chest, a rightness, a coming home that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with the man beside her. Tomorrow there would be consequences from the confrontation with Tom Morrison. Tomorrow there would be work and worry and the 1,000 challenges of making a life in this hard country. But today, in this moment, there was love acknowledged and fear overcome. There was Silas's hand in hers and the mountains standing witness to their truth. She was no longer the woman who had fled Boston in desperation, no longer the stranger who had arrived a day late to an uncertain welcome. She was Clara McCrae, beloved and loving, and she was exactly where she belonged. "Clara," Silas said as they reached the door. "Yes?" "Welcome home." And for the first time, truly and completely. She was. The letter to Charles Worthington took Clara 3 days to write. She sat at the kitchen table each evening after Silas had gone to bed, crafting and recrafting her words by lamplight. Not because she struggled to find accusations, those came all too easily, but because she needed them to be precisely right. This letter would either free her completely or bring Charles's wrath down upon them both. In the end, she kept it simple and devastating. "Charles, I know what you did to Margaret Sullivan before me. I know about the baby she lost after you pushed her down the stairs. I know about the servants you've silenced with money and threats. I have spoken with them. I have their testimonies, written and witnessed. I am beyond your reach now, but they are not. If you come after me, if you make any attempt to find me or harm those I love, these testimonies will find their way to every newspaper in Boston, to your father's business associates, to the governor himself. Live your life, Charles, but live it far from me. And pray the women you've hurt find more mercy in their hearts than you ever showed them. C.E." She sent it through a lawyer in Denver, someone Silas knew from his cattle driving days who could be trusted to handle delicate matters. Then she tried to put it from her mind, throwing herself into the ranch work and her growing practice with Dr. Hartman. But 3 weeks later, as she was returning from helping with a difficult birth at the Olson farm, she found a familiar carriage waiting outside the ranch house. Her blood turned to ice. Charles hadn't come alone. He'd brought 2 men, bodyguards by their look, and they stood flanking him like dark pillars as he examined the modest ranch house with obvious disdain. He was exactly as she remembered, impeccably dressed, golden-haired, handsome in that polished way that had once made her heart flutter and now made her stomach churn. "Clara, darling," he said, turning at the sound of Duchess's hooves. "What a quaint situation you found yourself in." Clara dismounted slowly, acutely aware that Silas was in the far pasture, too far to hear if she called. "How did you find me?" Charles smiled, that cold expression she knew so well. "Money opens many doors. My dear, did you really think you could threaten me?" "Me?" His voice hardened. "You've embarrassed me. Clara, made me look weak. That requires correction. I'm not returning with you." "Oh, but you are." He stepped closer, and his bodyguards moved with him. "You see, I've already explained to everyone back home that you suffered a nervous breakdown. The tragedy of losing our child. Yes, I told them about that unfortunate situation. It broke your delicate mind. You fled in a state of hysteria, but I, devoted fiancé that I am, have come to bring you home for proper care. We were never engaged." Clara said steadily. "I broke it off before I left, as you well know." "Details." He waved a dismissive hand. "Who will they believe? You, playing house with some frontier savage? Or me, with my family's reputation and a doctor willing to swear to your instability?" One of the bodyguards stepped forward, reaching for Clara's arm. She jerked back, but there was nowhere to run. Then a rifle shot cracked across the yard, and the man stumbled back with a cry, clutching his shoulder. "Next one kills," Silas said, emerging from behind the barn, rifle steady. "You gentlemen are trespassing on private property." Charles's face contorted with rage. "You dare!" "I dare a lot when it comes to my wife." Silas moved closer, positioning himself between Clara and the threat. "You must be Worthington. Clara told me about you." Takes a special kind of coward to beat women. How dare you speak to me that way? You'll backwater nobody. Charles. Clara stepped out from behind Silas, though she kept close enough to feel his solid presence. You made a mistake coming here. This isn't Boston. Your name means nothing. Your money means nothing. And these people? She gestured to the horizon where riders were approaching. Their neighbors, drawn by the gunshot. They protect their own. Indeed, within minutes the yard was filling with armed men. Elijah Moss, the Henderson boys, even gruff Ben Taylor from the neighboring ranch. They formed a loose circle, faces hard, rifles casual but ready. Seems you're outnumbered. Friend, Marshal Dixon said, riding up with perfect timing. And attacking a man's wife on his own property. That's a hanging offense in these parts. Charles's handsome face had gone pale. She's not his wife. She's my— Your what? Clara interrupted. Your victim. Your property. I'm neither. She pulled out a folded paper. This is our marriage certificate, legal and binding. Whatever claim you thought you had ended the day I left Boston. You little— Charles started forward, but found himself staring down multiple rifle barrels. I'd choose your next words real careful like, the marshal advised. It was then that Reverend Campbell pushed through the crowd, and with him, a surprise. Mrs. Margaret Sullivan herself, travel-worn but determined. Hello, Charles, she said quietly, and Charles went white as paper. Margaret, what do you— Clara wrote to me, told me she was ready to stand up to you. Well, so am I. Margaret's voice grew stronger. I've brought letters, Charles, from all of them. Every woman you've hurt, we've been talking, comparing stories. Your reign of terror is over. Charles looked wildly between them all. Clara standing firm, Margaret speaking truth, the circle of armed men, the marshal waiting with hand on pistol. His carefully constructed world was crumbling. This isn't over, he snarled. My father has been informed of everything, Margaret said calmly. In fact, I had a very illuminating conversation with him before I left. He's more concerned with saving the family name than saving you. You'll find your accounts have been adjusted. Consider it payment for years of pain. The fight went out of Charles like air from a punctured balloon. He stood there, diminished. Just a cruel man stripped of his power. Get off my land, Silas said quietly. Don't come back. Don't write. Don't even think about her again, because if you do— He didn't need to finish the threat. Charles turned to his men. We're leaving. Not so fast, Marshal Dixon said. There's the matter of assault. Your man there shot first. I saw it clear. That's attempted murder in my book. It was a misunderstanding, Charles said desperately. We're leaving. We won't return. The marshal looked at Clara. Your choice, Mrs. McCrae. I can arrest them all. Or I can escort them to the territory border with a promise they never return. Clara looked at Charles, seeing him truly for the first time, not the monster of her nightmares, but a pathetic, broken man clinging to illusions of power. Let them go, she said. But Marshal, please make sure they understand the consequences of returning. With pleasure, ma'am. As Charles was led away, he turned back once. You could have had everything, he said bitterly. I do have everything, Clara replied, taking Silas's hand. Everything that matters. The crowd dispersed slowly, neighbors offering support, expressing outrage at the attempted abduction. Margaret stayed behind, and Clara embraced her with tears in her eyes. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being brave. You showed me it was possible, Margaret said. Your letter gave me hope that we could fight back. The others feel the same. We're going to make sure he can never hurt anyone again. That evening, after Margaret had been settled in Sarah's old room for the night and the ranch had returned to quiet, Clara found Silas sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, staring out at the darkening sky. Standing guard? She asked, settling beside him. Just thinking. He set the rifle aside and pulled her close. When I saw him reach for you, when I realized what he intended, his jaw tightened. I wanted to kill him. Clara, not just stop him, kill him. But you didn't, because you didn't need me to. You stood there facing down your demon, strong as the mountains themselves. You didn't need saving. Clara nestled closer. I needed you there. Just knowing you were there made me strong enough to face him. He's really gone. It's really over? It's over. Margaret and the others will see to that. His father won't let him cause a scandal. He'll be shuffled off to Europe or somewhere equally far away. She sighed. I'm free. Silas. Truly free. He pressed a kiss to her temple. How do you want to celebrate this freedom? Clara smiled, a slow, warm expression that transformed her face. By living, by building our life here without looking over my shoulder, by being your wife in every way, not just on paper. Silas turned her in his arms, cupping her face. Clara McCrae, he said softly, you are the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. I'm just a woman who got tired of being afraid, she corrected, and who found a man worth being brave for. They sat together as stars began to appear, the vast Wyoming sky stretching endlessly above them. Inside, Margaret slept peacefully, safe for perhaps the first time in years. Tomorrow she would continue her journey, carrying with her the testimonies that would ensure Charles never hurt another woman. But tonight, there was just peace. Just Silas and Clara and the life they were building together. Stronger now for having been tested. The ghosts of the past, both his and hers, had been faced and overcome. What remained was the future, stretching out before them like the open range, full of possibility. I love you, Clara whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Silas replied, the words coming easier now. My brave, fierce, incredible wife. And there, on the porch of their modest ranch house, with the mountains standing witness and the stars looking down, Clara knew she had found her home at last. Not just a place of refuge, but a place of strength. Not just safety from the past, but hope for the future. She had come to Wyoming as a desperate woman fleeing danger. She remained as Clara McCrae, beloved wife, respected neighbor, and finally, truly, free. Spring arrived in full glory, painting the Wyoming valleys with wildflowers and filling the air with the sound of rushing snowmelt. The ranch had transformed under Silas and Clara's joint efforts. The barn rebuilt stronger than before, new fencing erected, a thriving vegetable garden spreading beside the house. Even the house itself bore signs of renewal. With fresh curtains Clara had sewn and new shelves Silas had built to hold her growing collection of medical texts. It was on a particularly fine morning in May that Silas suggested a camping trip to the high country. The meadows up near Eagle's Peak should be in full bloom, he said over breakfast. Thought we might take a few days, just the two of us. Clara agreed eagerly. Since Charles's departure 3 months prior, they had worked ceaselessly, building, planting, tending. A few days of respite in the mountains sounded like heaven. They set out at dawn, packing light but sufficient supplies on a gentle pack horse. Clara rode Duchess while Silas took his stallion, Zeus. The trail wound steadily upward through stands of aspen just leafing out in tender green, past rushing creeks swollen with snowmelt, into the high country where the air grew thin and sweet. I used to come here as a boy, Silas said as they paused to rest the horses. My father brought me hunting, but I preferred just exploring. There's a place I want to show you. Never took anyone there before, not even. He trailed off. But Clara understood. Not even Martha. They reached the spot near sunset. It was a hidden valley, cupped between peaks like a secret held in giant hands. A crystalline lake reflected the golden sky, and the meadows were indeed spectacular. Waves of columbine, Indian paintbrush, mountain avens, and flowers Clara couldn't name rippling in the evening breeze. Oh, Silas, she breathed. It's perfect. They made camp near the lake, working together with the ease of long practice. As darkness fell and stars emerged in impossible numbers, they sat by their small fire, shoulders touching, watching the flames dance. Can I tell you something? Clara asked quietly. Always. I've been thinking about that night, the night I arrived and found you. She felt him tense slightly beside her. You said I came just in time to save you. But I think the truth is, we saved each other." Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to her, firelight playing across his weathered features. "You're right," he said simply. "I was ready to die that night, had made my peace with it. Then you showed up, all fierce determination despite being half frozen yourself, and suddenly dying didn't seem like such a good idea anymore." Clara laughed softly. "I was terrified. I'd never seen anyone so badly hurt. But I kept thinking, I didn't come all this way to watch him die. Pure stubbornness. Really. Thank God for your stubbornness." He pulled her closer, and she nestled into his warmth. "Clara, these past months, I feel like I've been learning to live again. Not just survive, but really live. That's because of you." "We're because of each other?" Clara corrected. She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her slowly, tenderly, with all the reverence of a man who'd thought himself beyond such gifts. Later, in their bedroll beneath a canopy of stars, they made love with a passion deepened by trust and brightened by joy. Every touch was a promise, every whispered endearment a small victory over the ghosts that had once haunted them both. When Clara lay in Silas's arms afterward, listening to his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her ear, she felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What is it?" Silas asked, feeling her tears on his chest. "I'm happy," she said simply. "So happy it almost frightens me. I keep waiting for something to snatch it away." His arms tightened around her. "Nothing's snatching anything," he said fiercely. "We've earned this, Clara. We've earned every moment of it." The next morning they woke to find a light frost had silvered the meadow, making it sparkle like scattered diamonds in the early sun. They spent the day exploring, Silas showing her hidden waterfalls and ancient trees, teaching her to read animal signs in the soft earth. Clara collected plants she recognized from her medical texts, thinking of remedies she could make. It was at the highest point of their hike, overlooking the vast expanse of mountains and valleys, that Clara knew the time was right. "Silas," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately alert to her serious tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right." She placed his hand on her still flat belly. "We're going to have a baby." For a moment, he simply stared at her, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to read. Then his legs seemed to give out, and he sat down hard on a nearby rock. "Silas?" Clara knelt beside him, alarmed. "Say something." When he looked at her, tears were streaming down his face. "A baby?" he whispered. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed my monthly twice now. And there's been sickness in the mornings." He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she gasped, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "You're happy?" Clara asked against his shoulder. "I know after Sarah." "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "Clara, you've given me everything, a reason to live, a home that feels like home again. And now," his voice broke, "now a chance to be a father again. Yes, I'm happy. I'm terrified too, but mostly I'm so happy I could burst." They held each other there on the mountaintop, crying and laughing by turns, while the wind played around them and the endless sky witnessed their joy. That afternoon, as they made their way back to camp, Silas was like a man transformed. He helped Clara over every rough spot, fretting about her condition until she laughingly reminded him that she'd been in this state while doing all her regular chores for weeks now. "No more heavy lifting," he declared. "I'll hire help for the harvest, and you'll cut back on your work with Doc Hartman." "I'll do no such thing," Clara interrupted. "Women have been having babies while working since the beginning of time. I'm not made of porcelain, Silas McCrae, but you're precious," he said, so earnestly that her mock irritation melted away. "You're precious to me, Clara. Both of you are." That evening, they sat by the lake watching sunset paint the water gold and pink. Silas had fashioned a crown of wildflowers for Clara. "For the mother of my child," he'd said with shy pride, and she wore it like a queen's treasure. "Have you thought about names?" he asked, his hand resting protectively on her belly. "It's early yet," Clara said, "but I have some ideas. James, for a boy, after my father, despite his faults. He was a good man once. And for a girl—" She hesitated. "I thought maybe Hope. It seems fitting." "Hope," Silas repeated softly. "Yes, that's perfect." They stayed one more night in their mountain paradise, reluctant to leave this place where such precious news had been shared, but real life called, animals to tend, crops to nurture, a home to prepare for a new arrival. As they packed up camp the final morning, Silas crafted something from silver wire he'd brought for emergency repairs. When he finished, he held up a simple necklace with a small star pendant. "It's not much," he said, suddenly shy. "But I wanted to mark this moment somehow. The moment you told me we're going to be a family." Clara's eyes filled as he fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll never take it off." The ride home was quiet, but filled with a new energy. They pointed out spots along the trail. That flat area would be perfect for teaching a child to ride. That swimming hole would be ideal for cooling off on hot summer days. Those berry bushes would delight small hands come August. As the ranch came into view, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney they'd left banked, Clara felt a swell of emotion. This modest collection of buildings, this piece of hard-won land, this man beside her, it was everything she'd never dared dream of and more. "What are you thinking?" Silas asked, catching her expression. "That I was wrong in my letter to the marriage broker." Clara said, "I told them I wasn't looking for love or adventure, but I found both anyway. Plus something I didn't even know to look for." "What's that?" "Home," she said simply. "I found home." Silas reached over to squeeze her hand, the gesture saying more than words could. As they rode into the yard, chickens scattering before them and the mountains standing eternal guard, Clara touched the star at her throat and smiled. In a few months, there would be 3 of them. 3 hearts beating in this little corner of Wyoming. 3 souls making a stand against the vastness and hardship of frontier life. The thought should have been daunting, but instead it filled her with fierce joy. She looked at Silas, seeing not the broken man she'd found that winter night, but the husband, friend, and soon-to-be father who'd emerged from that chrysalis of grief. His smile, when he caught her looking, was bright as the mountain morning, full of promise and free of shadows. "Welcome home, Mrs. McCrae," he said, as he always did now when they returned from any journey. "Welcome home, Mr. McCrae," she replied, adding silently, "Welcome to our future, all 3 of us." The blizzard that heralded Hope's arrival was the worst in a decade. Snow piled against the windows until the house felt like a cave, and the wind howled with primal fury. Clara had been feeling the pain since morning but had said nothing, not wanting to worry Silas unnecessarily. But as afternoon wore on and the contractions grew stronger, she could no longer hide her condition. "The baby's coming," she gasped, gripping the kitchen table as another wave hit. Silas's face went white. "Now, but Doc Hartman, the storm." "Babies don't wait for convenient weather," Clara managed, trying to smile through the pain. "You'll have to help me." What followed were the longest hours of Silas's life. He who had delivered calves and foals, who had seen death and birth in equal measure on the frontier, found himself terrified by the prospect of delivering his own child. But Clara, even in her pain, guided him with remarkable calm. "I've helped with enough births," she panted between contractions. "I know what to do. I need you to be my hands." Through the night they labored together, the storm raging outside while inside their own storm of creation played out. Silas boiled water, gathered clean linens, held Clara's hand as she bore down with primal strength. When fear threatened to overwhelm him, memories of Martha's difficult labor with Sarah flooding back, Clara would meet his eyes and ground him in the present. "Stay with me," she'd whisper. "We're doing this together." Just as dawn was breaking, painting the snow-covered world in shades of pink and gold, Hope McCrae announced her arrival with a lusty cry that seemed to push back the storm itself. "A girl," Silas breathed, holding the squirming, perfect infant with shaking hands. "Clara, she's beautiful." Clara, exhausted but radiant, reached for their daughter as she cradled Hope to her breast. Silas saw in her face a joy so profound it took his breath away. He wrapped his arms around both of them. His girls, his world, and for the first time since he'd lost Martha and Sarah, felt his heart completely whole. The storm cleared by afternoon, and Doc Hartman made it through the drifts by evening, declaring both mother and baby in perfect health. "You did good, Silas," he said, clapping the new father on the shoulder. "Though I suspect Clara did most of the work." "She did everything," Silas agreed, unable to take his eyes off his wife and daughter. "She's amazing." Word of Hope's dramatic arrival spread quickly through Willow Creek. Over the following weeks, a steady stream of visitors made their way to the ranch, bearing gifts and good wishes. The same women who had once whispered about the mail-order bride now cooed over her baby and praised her strength. As spring arrived and Hope grew round and rosy, the ranch flourished along with her. The expanded vegetable garden burst with life. The chicken flock grew to 24 strong birds, and the cattle herd slowly increased. Silas built a porch swing where Clara could sit with Hope in the evenings, watching the sun set behind the mountains. But it was the unexpected development that summer that truly marked the ranch's transformation. It started when Elizabeth Morrison appeared at their door, Jake Morrison's wife, thin and bearing the telltale signs of harsh treatment. "Please," she said, holding a carpetbag and trembling. I heard you help women. I can't go back. I can't." Clara didn't hesitate. "Come in," she said, opening the door wide. "You're safe here." Elizabeth was the first, but not the last. Word spread in whispers and careful letters. The McCrae Ranch was a haven. Women fleeing cruel husbands, young girls escaping forced marriages, mothers protecting their children from violent fathers. They came seeking shelter, and Clara never turned anyone away. Silas supported her without question, building an addition to the house with small rooms for their guests. "You're giving them what you needed," he said one evening as they watched Elizabeth teach young Amy Patterson to read. A place to stop running. The McCrae House, as it came to be known, operated quietly but effectively. Some women stayed only days, gathering strength before moving on to relatives or new lives elsewhere. Others lingered for months, helping with the ranch work while healing from their wounds, both physical and emotional. Clara taught them practical skills, cooking, sewing, basic medicine, while Silas ensured they could defend themselves, teaching shooting and riding to those who wanted to learn. It wasn't without risk. More than once, angry husbands appeared demanding the return of their property. But Silas, backed by Marshall Dixon and the growing number of townspeople who supported their work, stood firm. "Any man who raises a hand to a woman ain't welcome on this land," he'd say, rifle prominent. "Best move along." Through it all, Hope thrived, surrounded by a constantly changing extended family of aunties who doted on her. She took her first steps in the kitchen while 3 women cheered her on, spoke her first word, "Papa," while Silas was teaching a young mother to handle a pistol, and grew into a bold, bright child who seemed to embody her name perfectly. One winter evening, as snow fell gently outside and the house hummed with quiet activity, women sewing by the fire, someone reading aloud, Hope playing with blocks Silas had carved, Clara found herself standing in the doorway, simply taking it all in. Silas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "About circles," Clara said softly. "How I came here broken and desperate, and now we help others find what I found. It feels right, complete." "You've built something amazing here," Silas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We built it," Clara corrected. "None of this would exist without you. Your strength, your protection, your heart big enough to let all these strangers into our home." "They're not strangers," Silas said simply. "They're women in need. How could we not help?" That spring, A letter arrived that closed the final chapter of Clara's past. Charles Worthington had died in Italy, a drunken fall from a balcony, the letter said, though rumors suggested he'd made powerful enemies with his unchanged ways. His father had sent Clara a bank draft, compensation for past difficulties, he called it, though Clara knew it for what it was, blood money to ensure her continued silence. She and Silas discussed it at length before deciding to use the money to expand their sanctuary work. They built a proper dormitory, hired a teacher for the children who sometimes accompanied their mothers, and established a fund to help women start new lives when they were ready to leave. He'd hate knowing his money was helping women escape men like him, Clara said with grim satisfaction as they signed the papers. Good, Silas replied. Let some good come from all that evil. As Hope approached her 3rd birthday, Clara stood once again in the meadow by the stream where Martha and Sarah lay buried. She came here sometimes to think, to remember, to honor the women who had shaped Silas into the man who'd saved her. I'm taking care of him, she said quietly to the wooden crosses. We're taking care of each other, and Hope. She's so much like what you told me about Sarah, stubborn and brave and full of questions. You would have loved her. The wind rustled through the wildflowers, and for a moment, Clara could almost imagine it was an answer, a blessing, a passing of the torch from one love to another. That evening, as she helped serve dinner to their current guests, 8 women and 3 children, all at various stages of their journey to freedom, Clara caught Silas watching her with that expression of wonder he still sometimes wore. What? She asked, pausing with a plate in her hands. Just thinking about that day you arrived, he said. How you said you came just in time to save me. But look at all this. He gestured to the full table, the warm room, their daughter helping set out forks with careful concentration. You didn't just save me, Clara. You saved all of us. You keep saving people every day. Clara set down the plate and kissed him soundly, right there in front of everyone, causing Hope to giggle and several women to applaud. We save each other, she said firmly. That's what love does. It saves us all. Later, as the household settled for the night, Hope asleep in her crib, the guests safe in their rooms, the ranch peaceful under starlight, Clara and Silas sat together on their porch swing, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. Do you ever regret it? Silas asked quietly. This life? It's not what either of us expected when you answered that advertisement. Clara smiled in the darkness. I expected to be a helpmate to a grieving rancher. Instead, I found a partner, a purpose, a home, and a love I never dreamed possible. Regret it? Silas McCrae, this life is so much more than I ever dared hope for. Even with all the complications, the danger, the constant stream of people through our home. Especially with all that, Clara said firmly. We're doing good work here, important work, and we're doing it together. Silas pulled her closer, and they swayed gently on the swing he'd built with his own hands. In front of the house they'd filled with love and purpose, on the ranch that had become a beacon of hope for so many. You know what I think? Silas said after a long, comfortable silence. What's that? I think you arrived exactly when you were supposed to. Not a day late at all. Right on time to save us all. Clara smiled against his shoulder. Maybe you're right. Maybe everything happened exactly as it was meant to. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanging witnesses to the small human dramas below. But in this little corner of Wyoming, in this house built on second chances and stubborn love, those dramas had woven themselves into something larger. A testament to the power of 2 broken people choosing to heal together, and in doing so, creating a place where others could heal as well. As Clara drifted toward sleep, safe in her husband's arms, she thought she heard hope stirring in her crib and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces seeking shelter, new opportunities to extend the grace that had been given to her. But tonight, there was just this. The creak of the swing, the warmth of Silas beside her, the soft breathing of their daughter through the open window, and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived in service to love. I love you, she whispered to the man who had waited for her, who had trusted her with his broken heart, who had helped her build something beautiful from the ashes of their pasts. "I love you too," he replied. The word still a small miracle even after all this time. My brave, wonderful, perfectly timed bride. And in the McCrae house, all was well. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, redemption, and second chances in the Old West. We'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale, whether you're listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps even out on the range yourself. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of frontier romance and adventure. And share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback helps us know what stories touch your hearts. Until next time, partners.